On this week's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon, we are featuring a special leader segment with Staples. Today, we are joined by Leigh Pearson. As the Senior Director of Facilities, Sustainability, Sourcing and Procurement for Staples Canada, Leigh leads a diverse team responsible for the facility maintenance, repair, and service-related programs for all Canadian properties, over 320 locations, inclusive of supply chain, retail, corporate, and affiliates. For her efforts, Leigh was named to Canada's 2014 and 2016 Clean 50, which offers recognition to Canada's leaders in sustainability for their contributions over the prior 2 years and has been honored by Retail Council of Canada twice in the area of sustainability. Now let's get into the episode with Leigh.
In this podcast, we're going to be talking about sustainability and managing energy. Okay. And I know that's something that you want to talk about because there are some things that you've been really doing very forward-thinking in the work that you've done. So here's my first question for you, Leigh. When you look at sustainability, what is more dominant? Is it people or is it technology?
It's interesting because the interdependencies there are pretty significant, and the reality is you can have amazing technology, but if you don't have individuals who understand it or know how to leverage it, then again, you might see some initial wins, but not see that continue on. So I would say I struggle with which one is, because candidly, I think a lot of automation and technology, and it can really help us move faster with some of these things, but you do need to have the individuals who understand how to fully extract the benefit from that technology.
I am so pleased you said that because I've been in the business for 30 years and I worked for utilities. So they're very focused on technology, but what I found is, and by the way, we've had technology for years that can do a lot of things, but it's not executed because people don't know or understand how the technology works. So I'm so glad you conveyed the importance of people on the technology piece. So can you talk about Staples' role in enabling and others in Canada to be more sustainable? What things is Staples doing? Besides this podcast and this YouTube piece, which by the way is really important, but what other things is Staples doing?
Well, we're providing solutions. That's, when I think about it in a nutshell, what do? We create opportunities for individuals to find a solution, a holistic solution, from if they're buying product from us, whether that might be technology, that we have the ability to help them perhaps repair or warranty that and extend its useful life, number one. But when it is at the end of its life, that we could help them recycle that and divert it from landfill. So whether that be technology or batteries or writing instruments, electronics. So I think it's about creating that solution for consumers and for businesses alike. I would say the other thing is having an assortment of responsible products available to choose from having opportunities to have conversations like this that people can participate in, and or by just working with our customers.
Right.
And certainly this happens within the business community and sharing best practices.
Excellent. Okay, so that's something that you're doing now. Obviously, that's why you're here. But so that's really important because I think you're, as I said in there, I think you're a wave runner, and I think the information that you and the experience you have will be really helpful to hear, for others to hear, and how they can undertake that journey. That's great. For our audience, what would you suggest are critical issues to successfully manage energy?
Again, I would say it's understanding your properties, what they're comprised of, having proper data coming in, and also cross-referencing that data. So if you think about it, we have utility bill data, which tells one side of that story, but you have to also look at that and say, how do I look beyond that? Again, there's normalization for weather. There's the fact that meters are often estimated. So we cross-reference that against the data coming out of building automation. So if that's also looking at, well, what are we really consuming? We start to cross-reference those things. So I think things of that nature are really, really important.
Okay, I'm going to pick up because that was mentioned, and I think it's really critical, the data side. But with the data side, which you need and require, I know there's some really cool things that Staples is doing. Certainly, you've been in the forefront on the renewable side, so I want you to talk about that.
Yeah.
But also there's some exciting things on electrification
There
on
is.
some of the
Yeah.
of the transportation side. So can you share with people sort of, you have to have the data to actually figure out, how to procure or what to procure, but you also need to have this data to figure out, okay, does it make sense to electrify and where should we electrify? So do you want to talk about some of the programming that you're doing now that is
Sure.
forward?
Sure. A couple of things. So we'll talk about renewables first.
Yeah.
So we've been a partner of Bullfrog for 10 years.
Right.
And what's interesting about Bullfrog and how do you keep that momentum is because it's often a bit of an intangible. People say, are you consuming that power? No, we're not. We're still using traditional power. But what it means is we're looking at, if you take a space like this, which is a Bullfrog powered space, because again, it's an area where this is a co-working facility. Inherently, people are making a sustainable choice. So we've made a choice to invest in Bullfrog power for these locations, but helping to explain that process, that we're investing in renewable infrastructure in Canada, and we have been for a decade. But you're right. Part of that is understanding what value is that contribution making. Similar to when you look at things like electrification of the fleet, is that, again, we're early in that journey. And part of that is we have to do things in a responsible manner too. We want to be here to be able to enable these solutions, which means we need to do our due diligence. We need to make sure that what we're investing in doesn't impact our ability to serve our customers effectively. And so, we do have 2 vehicles in British Columbia. We have now 12 vehicles in Ontario. So just the start of that journey. But what's been very, very exciting, aside from the collaboration with that team, is the ability to then connect the vehicle data with our partner that monitors buildings to now say, let's start monitoring the fleet. Let's bring it into the dashboard. Let's understand, are those vehicles doing what we thought they would do, hoped they would do? And how do we leverage that to help the transportation team decide what comes next and at what pace?
Okay, so for our audience, what I'm gleaming, because we see sometimes people they treat this as a transaction. Okay, we're going to electrify our vehicles. Done.
No.
They don't measure the value, should it be done, where it should be done, and actually how can we optimize it? I think I heard you describing that's what you're doing. This is not a transaction type of thinking. It's a continual management process.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, honestly, everything we're doing is a relationship in some way. A relationship to our buildings, to our communities, to our partners, to our associates. So, this is honestly in it for the long term.
Right.
Meaning it would be short-sighted to treat this as a transaction.
Well, and I can tell you from experience, when you treat it as a transaction, you're actually not seeing the full value during the whole life cycle. So good on you, by the way.
Well, and I think, again, what you think something could be when you start, like what we thought some of these programs could be 20 years ago versus what they are now. If we had just stopped then.
Yes.
So many other things we've done since then would never have happened. Part of it is continuously challenging ourselves to think differently, to think bigger, to think smarter, to just think about all of the intersections, but also how to think collaboratively across our organization and say, by working together, how do we take what we've done and how do we amplify it?
Right. Okay. Those are great words of wisdom for our listeners to pick up on. What would you think is the biggest challenge your organization faces to become sustainable?
Again, I think it's big, it's broad. If you think about recycling, there's different municipal requirements. It's not one system. So that, making sure that we're supporting and complying to the requirements sometimes at a very municipal level.
Right.
When you're a national organization can be challenging. So you need to work through some of that. I would say it's, again, sometimes you have to go slow to go fast.
Sure.
Meaning, you do have to take the time to really say, this is an excellent idea. This sounds amazing. And there's a lot of things that come across my desk that are amazing things. But when you dig in and really look at it, sometimes they're not necessarily the right fit for us. Doesn't mean they're not the right fit somewhere else, but it's what we talked about earlier. It has to be aligned with your organization.
Right. And is it possible that it may not be right for you now, but maybe in 5 years it might be? It depends on the organization.
Look
right?
at EV. That's a great example.
It's a really good
right?
example. Yes.
Yeah.
No, really good example.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell the audience, like, what are the surprises you had when you were engaging with energy management? Like, what things surprised you when you undertook this process?
Again, it's finding the right partners.
Okay.
So that's important, and because, again, first person to say, this isn't the space I grew up in. This isn't where I thought necessarily I would be. I don't profess to be anything I'm not. I am a good connector of people and of things and systems. And so you have to find partners that speak the same language,
Yes.
that share the same commitment to, I don't need it to be big and shiny and fancy. I need it to be real.
Yep.
And I need to figure out together what we can do with what you're giving me. So I don't need a lot of flash.
Right.
I need a lot of substance. And finding, and that's not a slight on any partners out there, any other organizations. It's that there's a fit for everybody. And I'm very transparent with all the partners about what a relationship looks like.
Yep.
And so that's really important.
So I think I'm going to sort of paraphrase. This is about what you're really getting versus what it looks like. Like, what is the value it brings to the organization versus what it perceived to look like. That's what
Correct.
I'm gleaming this. There's no.
Yeah.
The greenwashing goes on a lot. I think that's ending because transparency is becoming. So it sounds like it's really substantial based on what you're doing.
Yeah, authenticity is very important.
Really critical.
Like and again, to our organization, but it's important to me.
Right.
I want to contribute to something that I believe in, and so therefore the relationships that we form are really important to that sense of authenticity. And I think it has allowed us to continue to move and to elevate and to build bigger sustainability programs.
So I have two last questions.
Sure.
Is there anything that we haven't addressed now that you think would be helpful to our listeners? Because again, remembering I'm setting this up, you have been doing this journey for 20 years. So there you have a vast amount of knowledge. And sometimes, I know sometimes we take things for granted because we've been doing it for so long, and you think, oh, it's just obvious, but it's not. Is there anything that you think that you could cover or should talk about?
I would say again, it's this to your point. It's not a one person, one department. This is a commitment by an organization. This requires collaboration. So don't try to do it alone. I would say always look outside of yourself. So be transparent and open to what you don't know, and be curious and challenge yourself to learn more. I would say the other piece that we haven't touched on here, which I do think is important, is that connection for us. When you think about CSR, we have 3 E's, of which environment is one. So I would say that connection with the team who looks at that, and I think about a partnership like Tree Canada, which we haven't talked about necessarily, which is also a decade-long commitment where, again, certainly it hits on our commitment to our communities, but there's a lovely connection from a carbon perspective and an energy perspective to that relationship. And so I would say, again, when you're not going it alone, think of how it aligns with other commitments that have been made within the organization, because you're much stronger together than you are alone.
Really good point. Last question, and there may have been some overlap. Based on this discussion, and what do you think is the biggest takeaway that our audience can get based on this discussion on effectively sustainability and how to manage energy? Is there anything that you want?
I would say take the time first to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Don't rush
Start
in.
small.
Yeah.
Start with the right partners. Think about the information you need to collect to make sure you know that you're focused on the right things.
Okay. Wonderful. Leigh, I want to thank you. I found this very informative and really helpful, and I think our audience will glean a lot of information on
Wonderful.
this as well. So thank
It's
you
a
so much
pleasure.
for all your time.
Thank you so
Appreciate it.
much. I appreciate it.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts. See you next week.